Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching War of 1812, Starting America's Dumbest War by Drawn of History. So this is part 1 of Drawn of History's series on the War of 1812. Now we haven't watched this channel before, but many of you have recommended Drawn of History, so I thought this would be a good place to start. Now, if you guys end up enjoying this one, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction. North America High School. Huh.
Now, Vice Admiralty courts are very good for the colonies. 13! Stop drawing on your desk! Stop drawing on my desk. Stop smuggling tea. Stop not paying taxes. Why are you always hassling me so much? Because you're on...
Yeah, that's right. The 13 colonies were the colonies that didn't behave. I like that in the background as well. Due Friday, 3-page essay on why the Proclamation of 1763 is a good thing, which, by the way, that's when they end the 7 Years' War. You essentially get this line set up along the western border of the 13 colonies, where Great Britain says, hey, you guys cannot settle west of that line. You've got a bunch of indigenous people west of that line. Y'all cannot settle west. Now, this was not a grand humanitarian gesture from the British government. They just did not want any more trouble, any more wars with the Native Americans. And so they're trying to keep the British settlers and other settlers contained essentially east of the Appalachian Mountains. Of course, the settlers themselves didn't like that, and they continued to settle west of the Appalachian Mountains, west of that proclamation line. So that's what that little prompt there is referencing. Of course, we've got the the British anthem there.
Grateful. Now, Vice Admiralty courts are... Hey, Canada. I'm gonna ditch class next period. You wanna come? With you? No. Well, I forgot. Your old goody-goody colony. Why you always acting better than me? I don't know. Maybe because your homespun clothes look like snotty handkerchiefs? Come on, you and me. We should totally hook up. Ew, we're like cousins. We could be kissing cousins. Ugh,
Liberty
13,
Bell.
You're so freaking weird. One day, Canada. One day.
Wow, what a start, huh?
It's 1776, and the 13 colonies were tired of being simps for England. They were sick and tired of paying taxes for nothing, other than war debt from the French and Indian War, which they kind of started. They were sick and tired of British troops trying to take the guns they...
Yeah, I will say, it wasn't necessarily about paying taxes for nothing. I mean, people understood that what their taxes were going to. They just didn't like that they had no say in what their taxes were going to, right? That's the whole point of no taxation without representation. I mean, when you look at the burden of taxation on the colonists, it really was not that high. The reason it was a big deal was, one, because of that principle that they didn't have any real representation in Parliament, and also, really, as a relative thing, the colonies had just been left alone for such a long time that now that Britain was imposing more direct control, made everybody really quite upset, even if that direct control wasn't as extreme as, say, what many people in the United Kingdom itself were experiencing.
Been stockpiling to shoot British troops. And they were sick and tired of drinking cheap, crappy British East India tea. They wanted to drink smuggled and slightly more expensive crappy tea. So they declared independence, and it sucked.
I mean, you can see there the influence of the merchant class, especially up in New England, right? When we look at a lot of our early revolutionaries, I mean, it was a pretty broad group of individuals, but you did see a lot of middle-class types, a lot of merchant types up in New England and Boston in particular. And so those merchants, you know, one of the reasons they were particularly upset with Britain is because Britain was getting in the way of their trade and smuggling operations, right? So there's a reason they were some of the people most angry about this reimposition of British control, and why they were so eager to become patriots and begin, well, at first rebelling and then go into full-on revolution.
Turns out fighting your superpower colonial daddy is hard, so for help, they turn to France, England's arch nemesis, the stiff wind to England's Trump hair. Hey, Louis the 16th, we somehow won the Battle of Saratoga, signaling that we might actually win this war. With your help, that is. If France becomes our ally, you could defeat your enemy England, force them to lose their most valuable colonies, and possibly regain some of your own.
Yeah, I mean, they're showing the, negotiation here where, first of all, these colonies, these new American, well, what would soon be the first American states, they need to prove to France that they can actually win battles against Britain, that this is not a doomed conflict, and they do that, particularly at Saratoga. And they're also showing that they had Benjamin Franklin over there in France doing a lot of the deal making, which is accurate, right? Benjamin Franklin was probably at this time the most famous American colonist, though of course a bunch of them would become very famous through this conflict. But prior to the Revolution, he's the most famous of the American colonists. Of course, he's a famous scientist and writer and political figure. He was well known not just in the Americas, but throughout Europe as well. He had quite the reputation. He also was sort of down with the French way of life, which is to say, he was down with a lot of the women in France, if you know what I mean. So he was the perfect guy to send to conduct a lot of these negotiations.
England, force them to lose their most valuable colonies and possibly regain some of your own.
Which he did successfully.
A man can only get so hard. So America won the war and its independence with France's help. And by help, it was more like France beat the boss while little brother United States mashed away on a controller that wasn't even plugged in.
Yeah, I mean, the role of the American colonists was essentially just to survive, right? To continue to be beaten by the British, to survive until they could get that aid in from France and Spain, but France in particular. Right? France brought in the naval power, they brought in a lot of money, supplies, men, and so then with major French support, the colonists were able to win this conflict against the British. But yeah, the whole thing the colonists were doing is basically just surviving, right? Just wearing Britain out over time, because the British, they had more supplies, they had more men. Now, those men weren't necessarily in the colonies, and that's one of the issues, of course, is that there's the big Atlantic Ocean in between the British Isles and the Americas, so they had to ship all their men and supplies across this wide ocean. But they did have more supplies and more men, and so it was the colonists' job just to hold out. And of course, the entry of France into the war was a massive boon for the revolutionaries.
The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, ended the conflict and established the new order in North America. With this treaty, the matter has been settled. I'm not so sure these terms will be fulfilled. We've gained the Northwest Territory, but England isn't abandoning their forts there. We've secured fishing rights off the coast of Canada, but we're already getting hassled by British naval ships. And as for us returning Loyalist property... I mean, you can have it back if you want. Yeah, but you forget...
Yeah, I mean, what they're sort of highlighting here is that, we look back on this conflict today, and we go, okay, 1783, the peace is signed, America is established, we'll have the Constitution a couple years later, we've got the United States. Which is true, but, it's easy to forget now, is that in the moment, this was all still a very uncertain proposition. It was not clear that the United States would remain as a country. It wasn't clear that all the states would agree to actually unify under one government. Who knows, they maybe would have split up at some point. Well, of course, we had a civil war, but I mean, at this point in the beginning, in Britain, it had not given up its North American territory. It still had tons of territory in North America, and as far as the British were concerned, yes, they were forced to concede, forced to sign away their rights to these colonies, but they hadn't really given up on still controlling these colonies, whether through a direct colonial relationship or perhaps a less direct post-colonial relationship. So, yes, America is essentially established through these peace negotiations and continental congresses and all that stuff, but, history was not set in stone. It was not confirmed that the United States would remain in existence and that it would expand across North America and be the country it is today. None of that was inevitable at this point.
Got the most important part. Great Britain has recognized us as a free and independent nation, something that they will never forget or ever try to question. Hey guys, look at the shadows this candle's giving me. 1, 2, 3, 4 shadows. It's foreshadowing. Meanwhile. So,
Right.
we won the Americans' war against England, but we didn't get any land. Nah. We didn't get back Canada, Louisiana, the Caribbean colonies, or holdings in India?
Yeah, I mean, France joins in on this conflict really because they want to stick it to the British, but also because they're hoping to gain back some of the territory they had lost during the Seven Years' War. Right? I mentioned the Seven Years' War earlier in this video, ended in 1763, was a massive win for the Brits, a massive loss for the French. Though, of course, the aftermath of that war does lead to the American Revolution. But even so, it was a win for the Brits, a loss for the French. The French lost the majority of their colonial territory in the Americas. They were looking to regain that. Well, what actually ends up happening with the American War for Independence is that France spends a whole lot of money, and then in the end, America sort of cuts them out of peace negotiations and goes straight to Britain, right? France was hoping, well, hopefully we can sort of dictate the terms of this negotiation, but America and Britain sort of step behind the scenes and they work out this peace deal themselves. And so France is essentially left out to dry. They really got nothing from this conflict. In fact, some of Louis's advisors had told him, hey, maybe it's not a good idea to get involved in this war. We already have massive amounts of debt, and this war is only going to make things worse. And they were exactly right. France has sunk even further into debt. They gained very little from this conflict, and of course now they are heading towards revolution.
No. And the war cost 1 billion livres, so the country is going bankrupt? Oui. Well, at least it can't get
And they're already going bankrupt. It's just made it worse.
US. Hello, do you have a second to talk about our Lord and Savior, Revolution?
Yeah.
Back across the Atlantic, the young American Republic started to make its way in the world. You know, declaring neutrality, establishing trade, displacing native people, American-type stuff. Then an old friend came knocking on the door.
Yeah, unfortunately, for the indigenous people, whatever colonizer you're talking about, British Empire, the French, the Americans, they were always being displaced and abused, massacred and genocided. Now, some worse than others, right, did vary based on the empire, but the indigenous people really received no good treatment. And of course, they had to fight for themselves and for their land, and that continued throughout the history of the United States.
Hey, America! Oh, hey, France. Hey, remember how you had a revolution because you wanted to have liberty and hate the taxes and stupid kings? Well, yes, I do. Oh, we did the same thing, man. That's fantastic. What are you doing now that you have a revolution? We're cutting off everyone's f***ing head. It's bonkers, man. You would love it. Do you want in? No, I think we're okay. Suit yourself, a-hole. I got to head back. England and the rest of Europe is pooping bricks right now, and I gotta put this mean short son of a bitch in charge. I hear you want to buy New Orleans.
Yeah, so the French Revolution happens, right? Now, war doesn't break out immediately, but only a few short years after the revolution begins, France is in war with most of Europe, right? So at this point, America has a choice. Do they get involved or do they stay out of it? Well, what are the reasons to get involved? Well, America had this alliance, this friendship with France, not to mention, France and America now had this sort of democratic revolutionary bond, so some people thought, hey, America should get involved on the side of France. Others thought we should stay out of it. And the reasons for staying out of it are, we don't really have the resources to get involved. This would sink us into a whole lot of debt. And also, we are a very new baby country. We just don't have the political stability to get involved in this conflict. Now, in the end, America sticks to neutrality. Well, they try. Of course, all of this is going to lead to both a quasi-war with France and the War of 1812 with Britain. So in the end, America gets into a fight with the opposing powers, both of them. But in the beginning, they sort of go for neutrality. It's a big thing George Washington stands on in his farewell address from the presidency. He says we should stay out of all these foreign conflicts. People feel it's just not worth it to get involved. Plus, of course, America had a revolution. Now France is having a revolution, but they were not aligned on everything, right? It's pretty easy to make the case that France's revolution became far more radical than America's. The American Revolution was more conservative than France's, which sounds strange to say about a revolution, but if we're looking at a scale, that's exactly how it was, right? And a lot of these early American leaders, especially your Federalists like an Alexander Hamilton or a John Adams, they really were looking towards Britain as a model for their government. In fact, some of them, like Hamilton, even wanted to turn the presidency or make the president into a king, which didn't end up happening, right? So there was, there's a spectrum here of how close you'd like to be to the United Kingdom. And so a lot of those guys were like, we don't really like what's going on in France, okay? Yes, we fought this revolution for a republic, but we are not about democracy or mob rule, as they would have called it. It frightened a lot of them. Now, there were a couple of these American revolutionary types who were more in favor of what was going on in France. Thomas Paine is a big one. In fact, he got involved. Thomas Jefferson, the two Thomases. Jefferson's another example, right? He was very enthusiastically in favor of the French Revolution. And in fact, he was involved in the very beginning as well. Now, as with most supporters, they did sort of sour on the revolution over time as it grew more radical and violent. But Jefferson was someone who believed in revolutionary radical violence. He believed in sort of ongoing revolution and had a bit more of a, I guess you could say, a democratic vision than someone like a Hamilton. Though even more racist, of course. That democratic vision was limited to white guys. So he was more in favor of getting involved in France. He was also a major Francophile. But of course, Jefferson and his ilk lose out in this battle, and the Federalists like Hamilton. Washington always tried to stay out of it, but he definitely leaned more towards the Federalists than he did the other side. Your good old Democratic Republicans, Jefferson. And so Hamilton and Washington's side, they went out, and America, well, at least tries to stay out of this conflict, but we'll see how that goes.
Right now, and I gotta put this mean short son of a bitch in charge. I hear you want to buy New Orleans.
If it's for sale,
I will sell it to you.
hey, I thought Spain owned it.
You fell off a truck, it's mine now. I will sell you New Orleans and all of Louisiana for, say, $50 million.
Really? Are you sure?
Yes, well, I am about to go to war with all of Europe, and I do not have the time to invade you from there right now.
Wait, what?
Nothing. We have a deal? Oui, bon, au revoir.
Now having both the Northwest Territory and the Louisiana Territory and
Yeah, and you can see how much land was added there, right? We've got our sort of original 13 colonies, which is essentially the eastern seaboard or the east coast into the south of the United States today. We then get sort of the Midwest, and then a massive chunk of the rest of the Midwest through the West, really, from that Louisiana Purchase. And we're sort of skipping over a couple of years of history here, right? We went straight from the beginning of the French Revolution to the Louisiana Purchase. There's some years in between. And the reason France sells this massive territory to the United States, well, there's some easy reasons, which is France needs money in this war it's waging against the entirety of Europe. In fact, they're sort of desperate for money, and Louisiana, the territory for them is not that profitable. I know it's a massive territory, it's not that well developed. There's not so much going on in terms of French industry. I mean, they're getting some beavers. There's some stuff happening, but not that much, right? And so it's not making them that much money. They need the money, so they sell it, right? Now, also, France's imperial endeavors had really been cut off in North America since the 7 Years' War. And really, one of the big reasons that they decide to sell the Louisiana Territory is due to Haiti or Saint-Domingue. That might sound a little bit strange. How are those two connected? Well, as like a lot of French people and leaders of this time, Napoleon wants to reestablish the French overseas empire, and key to that is maintaining control of Haiti, which was the colony of Saint-Domingue, which produced a massive amount of sugar. Now, Haiti goes into revolution, essentially alongside France, and in Haiti, it's a slave revolution, right? The enslaved people free themselves, they rise up, and, I mean, it's very complicated. They're aligned with the Republic for a bit, Then Napoleon comes into power. He essentially tries to reconquer the island and re-enslave the people. They don't let that happen. They fight back. And so Napoleon's basically lost control of France's most important colony, its wealthiest colony, which he felt was the key to the rest of France's colonial potential throughout the Americas, North America in particular. And so now he's sort of done with Haiti. He's failed there, failed massively. He thinks, screw it. The rest of this isn't going to work out. We'll sell the rest of this territory to the United States. So that is actually key to the Louisiana Purchase.
Since baseball had not been invented yet, America engaged in its original favorite pastime, taking Indian land.
Yep.
White settlers had steadily been heading west, encroaching on Native American land and plopping down pretty much wherever they pleased. Some tribes were bought off, but others had the gall to stand there and fight. Two such brazen, Shawnee Native Americans living in the Indiana Territory were Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa, aka the Prophet.
Yeah.
Brothers and sisters, the problems that affect one of us affect us all. We need to unite to form a confederation that can defend all of us from the Americans.
And that is the sort of rhetoric that Tecumseh was using, which was somewhat unique for the time, right? In that when you look at a lot of the westwards expansion of these European empires and then the United States, what you see is lands slowly or rapidly being taken from different Native American tribes through a variety of methods. What you see here is Tecumseh saying, look, we can't fight against these colonizers just as separate tribes. We need to fight as one people. So he's got this idea that all Native people need to come together, form a unified nation, and then struggle against foreign domination. Not to say that was an entirely new idea, but it was pretty innovative at this time, and he really puts it into practice, which is what makes him such an important leader of this time. And here we touch on the other side of the War of 1812. There's sort of two sides, you could say. I mean, well, I was going to say two fronts, but there's more than two fronts. But really the two parts of the war is the American conflict and tension with Britain, which we've touched on multiple times throughout this video, and then American warfare against the indigenous people, which is just this sort of slow-rolling but constant war throughout the, western frontier of the U.S., where settlers, militias, sometimes the U.S. military are in almost constant warfare with a variety of indigenous peoples out west. And this is the sort of, in some ways, the culmination of this wave of that struggle. Of course, that war against the native peoples will continue from this point onwards, but this is really a big moment in that sort of western frontier warfare.
Yes, and I've been to the other side. I've spoken with the Master of Life. He has shown me two worlds, one of blessings and one of pain, and we must reject the white ways of the evil spirit, their customs, their goods, their alcohol, and the way that they put up inspirational words on their living room walls. I mean, what is that? It's really tacky. The governor of the Indiana...
Yeah, and there was a lot about rejecting these sort of white European impositions, especially alcohol, right, which had been introduced by European settlers into indigenous communities. And, as you can imagine, having not been exposed to it really became a pretty harsh addiction for many people the moment they were exposed to this new substance they were unfamiliar with. And so, once again, it's part of that real indigenous identity that's developing, not just centered around a particular tribe, though, of course, tribal identity was still very strong, but centered around indigenous people as an ethnic group or a national group, sort of, that is really developing here.
Territory, William Henry Harrison was not impressed and fearful of their growing power.
Hey, if you're so buddy-buddy with your Master of Life,
Mr. Beat, I hear?
why don't you make the sun disappear?
And then there was an eclipse.
Oh, fart.
Psst, Tecumseh, come here. What is it, white man? If you're going to unite the people along the Mississippi, you're probably going to need these. Why are you giving me these? Why should I trust you British, who abandoned us after the Revolution? Well, if you haven't noticed, I still have territory in Canada, and my hands are full with this Napoleon guy. But if you don't want these guns, I'm sure I can find a home for them. Leave them and go.
Yeah, it's a fair question. Why should we trust you? But it's really not a question of trusting. Yeah, you shouldn't trust anybody. None of these empires are looking out for the indigenous people. But it might be worth making an alliance because now both of you have a common enemy in the United States. And Britain is willing to supply you with supplies and guns, firearms in particular, and get even more involved in the conflict later on. And so it's probably worth listening to that proposition, right?
Brother, I must venture off and unite the people. I leave you in charge, but please, don't start anything with the Americans, okay? We're just not yet, okay? Why? If they shoot us, the Master of Life will ensure the bullets simply bounce off. Yeah, that's not how bullets work. Just chill and I'll be back.
Yeah, we've got essentially our spiritual leader on one hand, and then our military leader slash political leader on the other hand. I definitely stick with Tecumseh more, his leadership.
Unbeknownst to the brothers, Harrison had received permission to lead a raid of soldiers and militiamen on Prophetstown, the central headquarters of Tecumseh's Confederacy.
They won't even see us coming.
And then the prophet quickly disregarded his brother's instructions. What would be known as the Battle of Tippecanoe wasn't particularly a victory for either side, unless you ask Harrison.
Oh,
Yeah.
that was great. I mean,
It became a big part of his campaign for the presidency. His slogan was Tippecanoe and Tyler too, in reference to his supposedly incredible victory here. And William Henry Harrison is one of these guys who you'd call a frontier fighter or an Indian fighter, who essentially makes his political career and then his campaign for presidency off of his achievements fighting against the indigenous people. Andrew Jackson is another example of one of those guys. A lot of the presidencies of this era sort of followed that mold, right? I mean, at first, everyone's fighting in the Revolutionary War. Now, the big way to impress your fellow countrymen is to fight against the indigenous people, or, of course, to fight in the upcoming War of 1812.
was great. We sure taught them savages a lesson or two.
Didn't you lose just as many men as they did?
Well, yes, but
Did you kill the prophet?
no, he got away.
Or did you get Tecumseh?
No, he wasn't even there. But we did push them back, and then I burned Prophetstown to the ground.
Wow, so we're burning down our enemies' capitals now. Hope that doesn't become a thing. Hey, look at all these shadows! The Battle of Tippecanoe further strengthened the alliance between the Brits and the Native Americans and fueled American anger at both. Also, back in 1803, the Napoleonic Wars started in Europe, with France pretty much taking on everyone.
True.
Because England and France were too busy killing each other, the United States started getting filthy rich trading with both countries.
This is because I'm playing both sides so that I always come out on top.
As you can expect, soon both France and England started ignoring supposed American neutrality and seized ships bound for their respective rival. To make
Yeah, right? So America's like, well, we're staying neutral. That's what George Washington said. So we're going to sell to both of you. We're going to make a lot of moolah. And then Britain and France are like, no. You know, France is like, you're not selling to Britain. And Britain's like, you're not selling to France. We're going to intercept your ships. And though this is what really is going to lead up to the War of 1812 with Britain, this is also an issue with France, which leads in part to the quasi-war, mostly of the sort of 1790s, actually. So we're already sort of moving past that point, where you have this sort of low-tier naval warfare between the United States and France. Sort of similar issues are happening with both of these countries, but it's just that the War of 1812 will be the center stage of this for the United States.
make matters worse, England started impressing sailors on these American ships. And that's the story of how I ordered coffee behind Emma Watson. Oh. No, not that impressment. Oh, and now you're part of the British Navy. Oh. Yeah, that one. England...
Yeah, I mean, how naval recruitment worked, you might not even call it recruitment. I mean, look, the Royal Navy was this pretty elite service at this time, especially your officer corps were made up of an elite group of fellows, but for the regular soldier, or seaman, I guess you could say, it was not necessarily a fantastic gig. And so you had to essentially force people into service. And so in Britain, you'd have what were called press gangs, which were essentially gangs, armed gangs sent out by the military, the Navy, who would prowl around naval ports, port cities in Britain. They would find men who usually were drunk and would essentially force them into signing a contract that they would serve in the Navy. There were sort of various degrees of compulsion, right? Sometimes it was, hey, we'll give you a bit of money, we'll buy you a drink. Hey, sign your name, you're already drunk, you'll do it. Sometimes it was, hey, we're going to beat you up, and you're going to be drafted into the Navy. This was not unique to Britain, right? This was done in other countries for their navies and armies, but you had these notorious press gangs in Britain. Now what you see is impressment of American sailors, right? So they're seizing these American ships, and they're saying, okay, you're now in the British Navy. And these guys are like, what? What the hell?
Needed all of their sailors and then some. But many British sailors had deserted the British Navy, claimed they had become American citizens, or just left for better pay on neutral American ships.
Yeah, and you can sort of imagine how this causes issues, because Britain is saying, no, all those guys we took, they're British citizens. We have a right to take them. And of course, all those guys are saying, we are Americans. And sometimes they were British citizens who had become Americans. Sometimes, well, of course, that was most Americans at that point, right? They had been part of the British Empire not that long ago. Sometimes it was people who had really nothing to do with America, but they just didn't want to be pressed into joining the British Navy, right? But either way, you can imagine how both sides see this a little differently. And the Americans are very upset by what they see as an infringement upon their liberties.
So English naval officers would stop U.S. vessels and try to determine which sailors were really British. He's British. He's British. Hey, don't I know you? No, sir. I'm from New Jersey. Oh, Lord, he must be telling the truth. No one would ever lie and say they were from New Jersey. Over 6,000 men, most of them actually British, were impressed, and most true Americans were eventually released. But what incensed Americans the most were the orders in council. By this point, Napoleon had taken over all of the European continent and passed the Berlin Decree, banning all ships under his continental system or even neutral ships from using British ports. Not to be outdone, the British countered with the orders in council, saying all continental ports are hereby blockaded, and neutral ships headed.
So now both powers are essentially trying to blockade each other, and I mean, it doesn't work great for either, but it especially doesn't work great for France, for Napoleon.
To them needed to first stop in Britain, submit to a search, pay a duty, trade the cookies their mommies had packed them, but perhaps worst of all,
First you gotta do the truffle shuffle. Come on! Do it! Come on! Do it!
Then President Thomas Jefferson had had enough and persuaded Congress to pass the Embargo Act of 1807, meaning that American merchants couldn't import or export goods. That'll show them.
Yeah, which really was not a great economic move. I mean, you know, Jefferson's presidency, there's good and bad. I tend to think there's more good than bad. But that was not a great move, especially for the economy. All right, we'll just do an embargo on all of y'all. It's like, okay. Is that really going to solve the issue? Probably not.
As you can guess, the American economy promptly fell into the toilet.
Yeah.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
Yeah, it's a self-imposed recession.
In 1809,
Which, well, we're not that unfamiliar with those, huh?
the Embargo Act was switched out with the Non-Intercourse Act, which really only made trade with England and France forbidden and didn't really make the situation much better. So between the aiding of Indians, the impressment of men, and the orders in council, America kinda wanted to go to war with England? Jefferson's successor, President James Madison, no,
Bruh.
go down, scroll down. There you go.
Bruh. He was pretty short. But yeah, America, that's the point they're at. They kind of want to go to war. I mean, it doesn't help. I talked about the split earlier between your Federalists and your Democratic Republicans. There are also different names for these factions. Could really call them the Hamiltonians versus the Jeffersonians, which is really essentially what this was, a personality struggle between these two men. Though, at this time, that's long past, and this is sort of the the reign of the Democratic Republicans, the Jeffersonians, the era of good feelings, as it's sometimes called. Those Jeffersonians tended to be Francophiles, right? Whereas your Hamilton guys tended to be fans of the British, right? Hamilton, John Adams, these type of fellas. We've gone from Jefferson to Madison, and Jefferson's good buddy and protege in many ways. These guys were definitely more oriented towards France than they were Britain. I mean, Jefferson's an extreme example, but he wasn't the only one. And so, I mean, Jefferson especially, but the others were pretty hostile towards Britain in particular, which, you know, I can't necessarily blame them for, given that you just won your independence from Britain a couple of years ago. In fact, Jefferson, he was always worried about those Hamiltonian types, especially those like Hamilton who wanted the presidency to be a king. He was constantly worried, and once again, we're past this, but he was worried that those types of federalists would essentially try and emulate the British system and appoint a king in the United States, which he was very afraid of. Now, that didn't happen, but that was one of his concerns.
Madison had tried to work it out. Hey guys, how about this? I'll trade with whoever agrees to stop attacking our ships, okay? Fine, I'll stop attacking your ships. Be neutral, whatever. What about you, England? You in? No. This is stupid. Well, if he's not going to stop, I'm not going to either. Nationalism swelled in the United States with a second war for independence being called for by young war hawks like Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun. Just curious, what did these dashingly handsome men look like a
Oh, you're gonna love these.
few decades later?
Oh my God! What's wrong with your face?
Madison
I remember in high school seeing photos of Clay and I think Calhoun in particular, but both of them being like, damn, those guys looked weird. I mean, I'm not trying to be insulting, but they had a look to them.
was pushed to ask
And were some of the most prominent. I mean, Calhoun and Clay might have been the two most prominent legislators of this era.
Congress for a declaration of war on June 1st, 1812. Debate raged along party lines with Democratic Republicans calling for war and Federalists calling against. We
Yep.
need to restore the honor of this great nation! Yeah, we need to restore our economy, you dolt. The only thing preventing us from expanding are the Indians, who are
The accents are so bad.
supplied by the Brits. Great, we gotta have our ports blown up so you can have some more cow patties. Hell, if we do
But we've talked about the sort of ideological split between those Democratic Republicans and the Federalists already, but another part of this you might see, I mean, look at some of these states who are more pro-intervention in war, Kentucky, Ohio, right? Well, these are Western states. At this time, they were about the most west you could go, right? That was the Western frontier. And so these are the states that have the biggest issues with fighting against Native Americans out west. So they have far more of an interest in going to war against the British versus a state like Massachusetts, which is far more Eastern focused, right? And in fact, a lot of its economy is focused in doing trade with Britain in particular. And so they would rather wrap all of this up and have a sort of amicable agreement where we can go back to trading. So you can see how, you know, military, political, economic, ideological concerns are wrapped up in all of this and splitting these different groups, pro and anti-war.
this thing right, we could grab Canada. They'd be happy to join us. We could grab Canada. We could grab Canada. We could grab Canada. Canada? I'm coming, baby! Let's go to war! So by the smallest margin of votes to do so the nation would ever cast, the United States declared war on England. But wait, coincidentally, just days after the war had been declared, England repealed the orders in council.
Uh-oh.
Maybe this war wouldn't be needed after all. Word was rushed.
Yeah, we'll see in this war that the slow communication of the time could lead to serious political and military ramifications.
Across the Atlantic, and when it reached the shore, it was greeted by, "Fuck you. Let's do this."
Yeah, basically.
Hey, Mr. Beat, what brings you here?
It was Mr. Beat. Well, shout out both to Mr. Beat and Drawn of History. That was definitely an interesting video. I enjoyed the animation style. If you guys like this one, hey, feel free to leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. I hope you're all having a fantastic day today. With that, I'll see you all again next time. Goodbye.